Now I would like to give the floor to Kelsey Bjornsgaard, but not before mentioning her professional background. Kelsey is a consultant specializing in preventing and countering violent extremism, capacity building and training, also in strategic communication, social media campaign, and youth engagement and education. She was working at grassroots and policy level to enhance the capabilities and opportunities for young people in preventing and countering violent extremism, and improve the type of resources available to promote as well as enable youth. This is just for mention some of her experience. And now, without further delay, Kelsey, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and swap my, there we go. All right, hopefully everybody can see this now.
Yes,
yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction and for putting me in this webinar series. Really glad to be able to present today. So as you said, I'm a senior advisor at ISD, and for anyone who's not familiar with ISD, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, it's a counter-extremism organization that's based in London, and it's working to address the challenges of hate and extremism globally. So ISD works across ideologies, and it works through research, technology, networks, policy, and education. But it also works with a wide variety of different stakeholders. So we do work with policymakers, with municipal level cities. We work with civil society in a lot of different ways. And we also work with the private sector. But one of the stakeholders that we've been working with really closely over the last 5 years is actually youth. And that's where I've really done the most of my work, working with youth, largely through our youth empowerment work that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, and largely through youth-led campaigning, which is most of what we'll be talking about today. So just to give a little bit of an overview of what you'll hopefully get out of this, this next half hour, is I'm going to be looking at 3 main ideas for how to create more effective campaigns. So we're going to be looking at creative alternatives for making your message more engaging. We're going to be looking at how to use different kinds of content strategically, but also how to enhance your reach and boost your presence online. So I'm going to make this as tangible as possible, and hopefully through this I'll be able to give you some ideas, or at least some inspiration that you're going to be able to take away and be able to integrate into your own projects to really enhance your own effectiveness. Now, this webinar is designed to help you make campaigns that are really kind of focused on younger audiences, so more for youth-based campaigns. So that's not to say that older audiences don't also respond well to creative outputs and are not also interested in fun activities. But in general, the advice usually holds better for youth. So just kind of harking back to one of the previous presentations in the series is just always tailor your campaign to your audience. So kind of take from this what you can for what's appropriate to the people that you're speaking to. And always, take this sort of advice and really fit it into the framework that makes the most sense for what your goals are, who you're speaking to, and what you're hoping to accomplish. So the central question that's really been kind of running through this webinar series has been, what makes a campaign effective? So how can you make sure that your communication campaign is going to reach your audience and have real impact? Now, unfortunately, there is no single thing that's going to make a campaign effective, but there are some key components that, if you include, should really enhance the effectiveness and enhance the impact of your campaign. Now, if you attended the first 2 webinars, you've already been introduced to some of these concepts. So things like your target audience, having a clear goal, smart objectives, about your message, making your message really localized, having credible messengers. So you've been introduced to some of those concepts already, and they're all really, really key. But I want to build on those concepts today and really look at how you can kind of fine-tune the content. So how you're going to deliver that message, both through different mediums, but also through your promotion. So what we're going to look at today is relevant, engaging content and deliverables, creating a unique brand that's identifiable, that's relatable, and that's trustworthy, and then a comprehensive promotion strategy. Now, even though I'm going to build on the previous two presentations, don't worry if you didn't attend those yet, because you're not going to have missed anything for this presentation necessarily, but do check them out on the website if you did miss them, because they were incredibly interesting. So what it kind of comes down to is, so what we're talking about is how to deliver your message. And in the last webinar, you learned a little bit about messaging and credible messengers, sorry. But I'm going to delve a little bit even beyond that. And it's not just about the message and the messenger, but also the package, the way you package that message and the way that you deliver it. So the way that we work with youth is we give them the freedom to define every aspect of their own campaigns. And what we found is that when you give young people this freedom, they will rarely pursue a more traditional form of counter narratives or campaigning. I mean, they go way outside the box and use really, really creative approaches to engage with the youth in their communities. So I've added a couple of photos from some of the campaigns we've worked on recently. On the left, we have a campaign that we were doing in Islamabad last year with a youth group, where they set up a series of city tours. So it's called diverse city tours. And one of the challenges that they were really trying to address was the fact that a lot of minority communities tend to live in their own sort of insular communities, and there's not a lot of opportunities for young people to meet other youth from outside of their own community, or even really necessarily be exposed to other cultures that live within their own cities, which means it's a lot easier for disinformation about those different communities to spread. So what they did is they organized a tour that they brought a lot of young people on a bus and then took them around the community to meet different leaders within smaller communities within Islamabad, and let those minority communities present themselves. And they did it through music, through dance, through food. It was a cultural and knowledge exchange that helped young people in Islamabad get to know their own city better and get to know the different people that were living within their own city, many of whom were not even aware of some of the groups that were living in their own city. Another one is a project that we did in Lebanon, where they were painting murals within the city. So they brought different groups of youth together, and they did trainings on civic participation, but also helping foster the idea that young people need to take pride and take ownership of their own community and take more of a leadership position within their community. And that included painting murals within the city. So they got to work with local artists to design their own murals, and then they all came together to paint them. In Kenya, we worked with a group that works with young boys through football. So they do football tournaments and football matches, but through all of that, there's a lot of training. There are a lot of opportunities to engage with the youth so that they can talk about things like gang violence and extremism. And in Senegal, we were working with a local rapper who was addressing issues of violence against women. In Senegal, we're working with a group of rappers, and so they put together a music festival, but it also included some panelists, so they brought in experts to talk on the topic. But because they did it through a music festival, they were able to get really, really high numbers of attendance, including people who probably would not have attended just a talk on gender-based violence. And that's one of the things that sort of culture and activities and kind of creative approaches to campaigning does, is it really expands your reach. So it's going to help you engage with new audiences. And really importantly, it's going to help you get the kind of audiences that are not typically interested in training or dialogue sessions or attending lectures. So often the audiences who are going to benefit most from being in the program, they're often going to be audiences that are a lot harder to engage with, which means that you're going to have to engage with them on their own terms. So you're going to have to go where they are and give them something that they're really going to be interested in. So rather than trying to get them interested in what you're comfortable doing or what you think you should be doing, you need to adapt what you're doing to what they're already interested in. Another benefit is using things like culture, popular culture. It can really deepen an audience's experience with the message that you're trying to deliver, because you're going to be able to present it in a format that they're familiar with or that they enjoy, and therefore they seek out. This is especially important when you're doing social media campaigns, because there's so much content online that being able to stand out by giving something that people want already and are seeking out is going to give you a huge advantage. So that's one of the things that we've really learned over the last couple of years, is that counter narratives or communication campaigns or community-based initiatives, they don't need to be typical. There isn't one specific type of activities that you're supposed to be doing. Everything that you do needs to be for your audience. So going back to one of the things that was mentioned, I think, in the second webinar, so this local communication approach, it doesn't only mean working with local messengers, although that's important. It doesn't only mean using terminology that people respond to well locally, although that's very important. What it means, though, is that you need to create something that is unique for that location. You shouldn't only be using the same methods and just transplant them into new places. There isn't just a sort of set way of doing campaigns that you can pick up and move from one place to the next. And that's not just across countries, that's, you know, between individual groups, between individual communities. Knowing how they respond to different types of information and being able to tailor it to them is going to get you much, much further in really making a deep impact. And when you're talking to youth, there's a million possibilities for how you can package that content and how you can make your campaign really, really dynamic and interesting and engaging, and something that young people, you're not going to have to chase them to be a part of, because they're going to want to be a part of it. They're going to want to listen. They're going to want to engage with it because it's something that they enjoy. If you could give me the next slide, please. So one thing to really kind of caveat on this is to make sure that creativity is built into the project in a way that's really meaningful. So one thing that we see a lot is you'll get sort of interesting or creative outputs that are just kind of tacked on as an additional deliverable. So if you're doing like a traditional classroom-based training program, but it has a football match at the end, that's not really a football program. And having a football match at the end isn't necessarily going to get the right audiences interested if you're also having them sit through 4 weeks of classroom-based training, or even 4 hours of classroom-based training, because there's a chance that that's just not what they respond well to. So in most cases, just adding sort of a fun activity onto an already established campaign isn't going to be as effective as making it a central tenet of the program and of the process. So instead, think about how creative mediums can help serve your goals and really infuse them into the campaign and make them the sort of central carrier for your message. So how can you use them to really engage your audience and help them take in and understand your message? So two really interesting examples that we've been working on in the last year is a group in Lebanon called First Step. Again, it's a group of rappers, but they were looking to really try to bridge the divide between the large refugee community that was living in Saida and the Lebanese-born population. And one of the things they did is, rather than just creating a song, you know, in a video and an album about the issue, they sought out and they brought together Lebanese-born rappers and Syrian-born rappers, so refugee rappers. They had them come together, and through a series of different meetings, they wrote music together. So they brought in experts who were able to help train them on, you know, they got some training on songwriting, but also on music production. So there was a lot of incentive for these rappers to get involved, because they also learned a lot about music and they got a lot of really valuable training out of it that was helpful for them in furthering their own art. But they also had an opportunity to work with people from another community that they maybe hadn't been exposed to and hadn't had a lot of interaction with, and they had to develop music together that really spoke to the topic. Another example, we were working in Kwale with a group called the Kwale Youth Talent Network, and they were really concerned with tribalism within Kwale. And they took kind of a similar approach where they wanted to make a short film about tribalism. But rather than just making the film and involving the communities, what they did is they sought out young people within 3 different tribes who were really interested in becoming filmmakers, who wanted to learn this process, and had them come together, and they're writing a script together, they're going to film the short film together. So the entire process is really collaborative, it's really educational, but at the core, it is a program that's bringing 2 different groups together and getting them to work together and collaborate in a way that really helps them live and understand each other's experience. But it brings in people who might not have been interested in this program otherwise, because they're getting so much more out of it. It's something they want to do anyway. And they're able to kind of build these relationships and work through this collaborative process together in a way that's a little bit more natural, because it's focused on something that they love. And then the bonus is the creative outputs that come out of the end are also really beneficial, because you get a huge amount of reach through the music that came out of it and through the short film that will eventually come out of Kwale. So these are some examples just to kind of help understand how these sort of creative approaches can be used, but how they really need to be integrated and used well. And this is where you can go beyond. So using credible messengers is so important, but if you really want to make your campaign more effective, go beyond just using credible messengers and connect with actual influencers within the community that you want to work, and let them guide you and how to make your campaign really, really interesting for your audience. Next slide, please. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about somewhat briefly is branding. So branding is something that's really, really important for campaigns. It's often a little bit overlooked. Now, depending on how you're working, you might not want to create a standalone brand for your campaign. You might plan to just put everything out through your organization's brand, which is completely fine depending on sort of the size and the tone of the campaign. But even if that's the case, even if you're not planning to create a standalone brand, all of the information on this slide is still really useful to help you kind of refine your own existing brand and make it more dynamic. Because the thing is, you can add some new dimensions that really help you connect with and engage your audience. It's going to help you take all of your content, all of your messaging, everything that you're doing further, because it's going to help you establish trust. But do consider developing a standalone brand for your campaign if it's going to be running for a longer period of time. So if you're doing a year-long campaign during which you plan to put out a lot of content, you're going to be doing a lot, and you really want to build up traction, sometimes it's worth having a unique platform for it, just so everything you're doing doesn't get sort of buried in the wider work of your organization. Another consideration is if the campaign has a really specific message, or if it has sort of a positioning or a language that might be either kind of smaller, more specific, or that's not completely aligned with your organization. So for example, a couple of years ago with YouthCan, we did a campaign called the Dystopian Net. Now YouthCan's brand is very positive and upbeat and genuine and encouraging, and that's the thing, is all of our communication is meant to be very genuine. This campaign, the Dystopian Net, it was intentionally pessimistic and had really, really strong sarcastic overtones. The communication style was intentionally not very genuine. So it didn't mesh with our YouthCan brand. So we spun it out, we gave it its own platform. Even though it only ran for about a month or so, it was fairly small scale, it was worth giving it its own space and its own brand, just because it didn't align well with our own branding. But so if you decide that you want to make a standalone brand, or if you want to, add some new dimensions, make your own brand more dynamic, there's several different things that you should really consider, because you need to remember that your brand is ultimately your campaign's identity. It's not just a logo. It's not just your colors. It goes so far beyond that if you want to make a really strong brand that people can connect with. If you want a campaign that people really want to be a part of and feel that it speaks for them and to them, you really need to build out what you can call your brand's personality. So obviously there's the name of the campaign, which hopefully will speak to what you're doing somehow. One of the common mistakes we see people make is when you try to get too clever with a campaign's name, that it loses a little bit of its meaning and a little bit of its clarity. There's the logo. There's a lot that can be said about how to make a logo, because it does need to be simple and clear and striking. Your slogan, your hashtags, your color scheme, obviously, and your font. So these are all things that are really important in creating the kind of physical or visual, rather, identification of what your campaign is. People can see things at a glance. They can say, okay, I recognize that. I know that it's part of this campaign. Because once you get that kind of brand recognition, it gets a lot easier. So think about if you've seen like AJ Plus videos. You don't even need to see the AJ Plus logo. If you see the style and the color of the font that's on the video, you know it's an AJ Plus video immediately. So that's through that really consistent visual presence, they've been able to build up a really recognizable brand that helps them. Because when people see that flash by on social media, if they like AJ Plus, they know to immediately stop and say, oh, I know what this video is, I'm going to watch it. But those are really sort of the visual attributes, and that's what I think most people think of with brands. But you need to go, a level deeper to really create that personality and that identity, and that's through helping create a story. So what is your campaign story? What is your organization's story? And this is where you get a chance to kind of be human and connect with people, because ultimately brands, even though they're brands, they have to feel human. People need to feel like they can make a connection to them. And that story is really going to help you, especially when you're trying to build up credibility and build up trust within a community. That story really helps you communicate that you are, one of them, or you're part of them, or you're comfortable speaking with them and for them. The attributes are the sort of adjectives that you would use to describe the brand. So like I said with Youth Can earlier, that it's, it's upbeat, it's positive, it's genuine. Was the other campaign, it was a little bit more, it was sarcastic, it was gritty. So think about the different attributes, how if you were to describe your campaign like you describe a person, what would those attributes be? And being able to kind of write those down and establish them, it might feel kind of silly if you've never done it before, but it helps you create a really consistent brand that people will enjoy engaging with, because you're building something up. So positioning is just what your position is and on different issues. So obviously the main issue you're concerned with, you need to have a really clear, consistent position on it, so that when something comes up, all of your responses, all of your communication reflect a specific position, because then people know, oh, I share that position, I share those values, I share, that way of thinking. You want to make sure that that's really consistent. So write it out, make sure everyone on the team knows it so they know how to respond, but also consider your positioning on related issues, so that if anything comes up, you know how to respond in a way that's consistent. Think about the personality and the voice. Is it kind of bubbly? Is it serious? Is it, academic? Like, what tone makes the most sense? And build that tone out and build it into the campaign so that it becomes a part of it and that it's consistent. And then the other thing is just which platforms you're going to be using. And we're going to get into that quite a bit more in the rest of this. But just to really, really stress with your brand is the reason it's important to really kind of write this stuff down and take it seriously and make a plan and really, really make a clear framework for your brand is, especially if you have multiple people working on a project, you need to make sure that everyone understands and agrees on who this campaign is. What is its personality? What is its identity? Make sure that everybody's in agreement on that, so that everybody speaks about it and can present it in a way that's consistent. Because it takes a long time to build up a brand, but once you do, it's going to carry a lot of the work for you. Next slide, please. All right. So when we talked about platforms, so when we're going, because for the last bit of this presentation, I want to talk about the promotion strategy. So how are you going to enhance your reach and boost your presence? Now, I'm going to focus at this point on the online. So it's just as important to have a really good promotion strategy that works offline. But there's a lot more, there's a lot of nuance in doing things online, but there's even more so in doing a good promotion strategy offline, because it's so specific to the individual area where you're working. So it's a little bit easier to speak more generally about the online, but also because online has become social media specifically has become so prolific and so omnipresent. I'm really going to focus on how to increase your reach online. So starting with specifically, obviously, social media, because social media is a really important tool. Even if the majority of your deliverables take place offline, social media is still really, really important for you to be able to make your campaign more effective, because it's going to massively enhance your reach. The interesting thing about social media is that the reach, it's both vast and that you have access to hundreds of thousands of millions of people if you want, but it's also incredibly targeted, because you can use all of the different tools that are available to make sure that you're really reaching the people you want to reach. So the advantage of social media over traditional websites is that rather than working to bring your audience to you, you're able to go to your audience, and they're on a platform where they're already segmented into groups, they're already subject to complex algorithms that you can take advantage of, and probably best of all, they're already actively looking for content. They're on those sites because they want to see things. So it's just a matter of making sure that you're showing them the things that they want to see. Social media is also really valuable, though, for supporting offline activities. So, showing photos from events that you've done, videos, showing all of the great work that you're doing through the campaign. You can do that through social media, but it should never be an afterthought. You need to make sure that you build it into your planning. So that means have professional photographers at events. I know everybody can pick up a camera, but event photography is particularly difficult. And I always recommend having a professional photographer for at least a couple of hours at least one event to make sure that you're getting some really, really good, high quality photos. Also consider doing things like creating behind the scenes videos. So that's what we do for a lot of our programs, because we can capture, a year and a half worth of work in 3 minutes of video to be able to showcase to people what we've done in a way that is much more immersive. So social media, it's a great way of collecting and documenting everything that you've done and showcasing your efforts in real time. But the other thing is it also gives you a nice collection of your outputs that people can find at any time. So if they're interested in your project, they look you up on Facebook or on Instagram, and they can see immediately all of the amazing things that you've done. And one thing that I think is often overlooked with social media is it is a living, breathing network. So it's a way that you can not only connect with your audience, but it gives you a chance to connect with and find new potential allies that you can support their work, they can support your work. A really good way of being found is finding people who are already maybe have a following or maybe already have some influence with your audience, and being able to connect with them and get them to help spread a little bit of your content and speak a little bit to what you're doing as well. Next slide, please. All right, so some very basic guidelines for doing campaigning on social media. So first, probably most basic, is making sure that you're on the right platform. Many of the social media platforms are fairly specialized. So YouTube, for example, obviously for videos. Instagram is much better for pictures, although you can do short videos. Twitter, everybody knows what Twitter's for. Then you have Facebook, which is more of an all-arounder. So you can really do anything on Facebook as far as content. So the first consideration for which platform you're going to choose is just what kind of content are you sharing? What do you want to do with the campaign? But beyond that, the most important deciding factor is just which platform your audience is actually using. So the advantage of being able to go to where your audience already is only works if you actually go to where your audience already is. So make sure that you do the research into which social media platforms are most popular with your audience. So don't just take the national statistics of use. Look at the demographic information, do a little bit of your own research as well. Whenever we go into new areas, we always do surveying, like widespread surveying, to find out which platforms are using, how they're using them. Do a lot of research into that before you choose a platform if you have the ability. But otherwise, there's a lot of good existing research just on which demographics are using which platforms and where. But whatever you do, resist the urge to use all of them. Don't overstretch yourself. A lot of groups that we work with have it in their head that they need to be everywhere, because what if they miss someone? What if 10 potential, audience members are only on YouTube? it's not worth it to overstretch yourself, because each one of these platforms requires a really specific, specialized approach. So you can't just have a list of content and then put it on Instagram the same way that you put it on Facebook, on the same way that you put it on Twitter. You have to create a specialized strategy for using each one of the platforms. And if you have time to do that well, if you have a dedicated communications team that can manage that for you, that's great. But if you don't, it's much better to be on fewer platforms well than on all of the platforms badly. Because even if you say your Instagram and your Facebook are amazing, but your YouTube's a bit sad, what if somebody, the first place they find you is YouTube? The only impression they have of your campaign is that it's not that great. So make sure that you are really, really 100% proud of your presence on every single platform. And if you can't maintain them all, that's completely fine. Just cut back. It's always better to have one really, really good, well-maintained platform that you're using strategically than to use them badly. When you're considering to post, so posting at the right time, I often get this question is, when should you post? And the answer is whenever your audience is online. And this is one of those that there isn't an immediate answer to, and that you're going to have to experiment a little bit. Try posting different types of content at different times and see what people respond to. You'll have sort of a general idea of when you think people are online, but really trial and error is going to be your best bet. Be sure to use the platform and not just your own page. So this goes back to that networking element and actually using the platforms really strategically. Again, this is one of the biggest mistakes that we see people making repeatedly, is they go onto this vast social network where they have all of these groups and all of these places and all of these users and allies at their fingertips, and instead they only use their own page. So go out there, be social, use the networking functions, and use the entirety of the platform. Make sure that you're being responsive. If people are commenting, if they are sending you messages, things like that, make sure you're responding. So Facebook, for example, has now added badges if a page is a quick responder or not. Make sure that you've got that badge, you're a quick responder. Always try to respond within a day, which means that even if you're only posting, say you're posting once a week, you need to have somebody on the team who's monitoring that page, at least checking it every morning, at the start of the day, and at the end of the day, just to make sure that you're not missing anything. Change it up, don't just post the same things over and over and over again, but make sure you're staying consistent to your message and to your brand, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And then just whatever you do, just remember to be social. Like, it's not a website, it doesn't have to be static. It also doesn't have to be too formal. Go out there when you're on social media and be personable, be social, make those connections, make those engagements as much as possible. Next slide, please. So there's sort of three general things that you can use social media for when you're talking about communication campaigns. So on the most basic, it helps you to inform your audience. So, it hosts information about your campaign and who you are. So it gives you a chance to inform anyone who comes across you about yourself. But it's also a chance to raise awareness and educate about your topic with a wider audience. So what we have found is people often do the second, but forget to do the first, or do the first and then do the second badly. So make sure that you're really, really balancing both of them. There should be more content about your topic than there is about yourself, but there's really nice ways of being able to kind of slip in information about yourself. So when you see posts, for example, that do like a big thank you when they hit 5,000 followers, and they say, oh, thank you, we hit 5,000 followers, this is amazing. So obviously that looks like it's saying thank you to the audience, but in reality what it's doing is saying to everybody, look how popular we've become, look how many followers we have, we're definitely worth continuing to follow and listening to. So there's all those things that you can do to kind of talk about yourself and promote yourself, which takes us into the second one. So that promotion element. So it's a place that you can get new followers and really promote your campaign, to promote all of the individual activities you're doing. And then again, just to be able to reach this really large but very hyper-targeted audiences. Once you've learned how to use the tools, especially, I mean, Facebook it's a fine enough tool that you can get it down to 5 individual people if you wanted to, or you can reach 5 million. It all depends on how you use it. But very importantly, just don't forget to engage. So the third thing that social media really helps you do is to engage. So it's ways for your audience to get involved and engage with your campaign, to get involved and engage with the topic, but also, try to create a platform where people can talk to each other. It's a good way to kind of bring people together, and there are ways that you can use social media to start discussions and help different people engage, get some engagement within your audience. But it's also a place to engage with other campaigns, other pages, and other people that are working on complementary projects, which is going to be a huge part of increasing your own reach. Next slide, please. Now, when you're posting on social media, the types of content that you post, we've sort of broken it down into 3 types. And what I would recommend is making sure that you have a balance of the 3. So there's immediate content, which means that you're able to get the message at a glance. So these are things like posters, images, memes, photos, the things that you're going to see as you're scrolling. This requires no actual commitment from your audience. They don't have to agree to watch the video to get the message. They don't have to agree, to join a discussion or to join a webinar, for example. They get what you're trying to say immediately at a glance. Interactive content, on the other hand, that requires some consent from the audience. So even if it's a short video, the audience still has to agree to watch the video, which means that if they don't watch the video, nobody's actually seeing your message. Same thing with articles and blogs, podcasts, music. They're all things that require the audience to agree to give you some of their time. Then you have more immersive content. So whereas interactive content tends to be one-way transmission, immersive content is something that is more conversational. So these are things like polls, discussions, webinars, live videos. Content contribution is probably the holy grail of immersive content. And I don't know if anybody remembers the Ice Bucket Challenge, but after that, the success of that campaign, everybody wanted to do content contribution. But content contribution, getting your audience to film a video for you or make something for you is incredibly difficult. So unless you have really, really good brand recognition, or you have a really dedicated audience, or in the case of the Ice Bucket Challenge, if you have celebrities, they're willing to do it for you. Be careful with relying too heavily on content contribution because it's difficult to get that going. But yeah, so immersive content is great because it's a chance for you to kind of do some back and forth, but it's a way for your audience to also contribute to the campaign without even being there. Now, there's 2 determinant factors that really differentiate these 3 types, and that is the amount of effort it takes from the audience, as I already mentioned, but also the amount of information and the amount of nuance and detail that you're able to give. So obviously immediate content is great because your audience is going to see your message whether they like it or not, just because they scrolled by it slow enough to see it. But there's only so much you can say in a poster. With interactive and immersive, it's amazing because you're able to get a huge amount of information out there, but it's harder to get them to see it. So what we always recommend is balance between the 3. Have the same message kind of delivered in 3 different ways. Make sure that there's a lot of different ways to get involved, because you'll have followers who love watching your videos and love reading your articles and are willing to do those things. But you're also going to have followers that think what you do is interesting, but they're not going to give you 3 minutes of their time to watch a video. They just never are, and that's okay too. So you need to make sure that you have content that works for them. So again, it all comes back to making sure that you're tailoring what you do to your audience rather than trying to force them to do what you want them to, because that works with a small percentage to kind of win them over and get them more engaged. But in general, make sure that you've got something for everybody. Next slide, please. Now, with immediate content, and I'm going to focus on this one just for a second, because oftentimes people, I have found that immediate content is often undervalued. So because you can't say very much, people think it isn't worthwhile. And I'd really, if you walk away with very few things from this, I really hope that you will walk away with sort of a greater appreciation of what you can do with immediate content, because especially on social media, it's so valuable. And especially if you don't have a ton of like recognition and following already. So especially when you want to get a campaign off the ground, you have to convince people that you're worth listening to. And that means you have to have really, really good immediate content that captures their attention right from the start. Because if they like what they see, then they're going to look for more. And that's when they're going to be willing to give you more and more time. So there's a couple of different things that you need to think about when you're doing visual content. So what's going to capture people's attention is the way it looks. It needs to be striking. In some way, it needs to be striking. And then you need to think about how much information you can actually get onto it. So having images that are really interesting are great for capturing attention, but they need to actually communicate something. So it's balancing between the visual and the communicative aspects so that people aren't overwhelmed by it. A famous saying online is "too long, didn't read." That doesn't only go for like blocks of text, that also goes for text on posters. So make sure that the most important things really stand out, so that people are going to see what they need to see. So these three are examples from the campaign that I mentioned earlier, the Dystopian Net. So it was an online education campaign that was focused on raising awareness and educating about sort of different online harms and kind of digital citizenship more broadly. But the angle that we took on it was the sort of old dystopian science fiction novels. So all of the imagery looks very sort of much like this. So the posters themselves were really hyper designed, but then they had these very sort of simplistic shortened definitions of all of these different digital citizenship topics and information. And then we had some articles and things that we cut out later in the campaign, but we really used these posters to capture attention. And because of that, we were able to build up a fairly large following fairly quickly because people responded really, really well to the posters, but also the tone of the posters. If you know that your audience loves memes, memes are great because they're so shareable. That's the other great thing about like visual content. It's very, very shareable. The only thing with memes is you need to make sure that you know your memes and you're using them correctly, because the sort of the types of audiences that really follow and share memes a lot online tend to be very protective of the meme formats and can be a little bit mean if you get them wrong. With photos, one thing, especially if you're sharing photos from your offline activities, do not do photo dumps. We see that all the time. If you're at an event, people tend to just upload 50 unedited, unsorted photos from an event, and that is one of the worst things you can do. So when you're going to post photos, make sure they're nice photos, make sure that you've gone through them, and don't post more than like 4 or 5 at a time because it's just overwhelming and a lot of people are just not going to look through them. So they need to be eye-catching and interesting so that people look at that and they're like, oh, that looks amazing. I want to be a part of that. So make sure every photo you post says that. And a photo doesn't just have to be a photo by itself. So, if you had a speaker at an event, you can take a really nice photo of that speaker, put your logo on it, put a quote from their panel, from their speech over the top of it, and then suddenly you have like a really interesting piece of content that you've built out of a photo that you can do yourself in 5 minutes on a service like Canva or even on Paint if you wanted to. So when we talk about photos, we don't just mean photo dumps. We mean take really, really nice photos and upload them in a way that's really interesting. Next slide, please. So this is an image that I always really love because I think it's a really, really good example of this. So this is part of a campaign from Operation Black Vote that was running during the UK's EU referendum. But it's a really, really good example of how a picture can be worth 1,000 words because it really distills down a really, really complex and polarizing discussion into a single photo. And if you were familiar with the context of the election, if you're familiar with the context of kind of what was going on at that time, it's really immediately recognizable and you almost don't need the text on it at all. I mean, a vote is a vote. It's communicating so much through so few words because of the power of the image. And then of course it has the date of the referendum and where to get registered to vote, because that's the ultimate thing, is getting people to register to vote, to see the importance of voting and that their vote matters. So it's able to communicate so much with just an image. So this is like a really good example of how the image that you choose, it doesn't just need to be eye-catching, it also needs to be communicative. So you can communicate both through the images and through the words that you put on the posters. So again, this is why immediate content can be incredibly powerful if you take time to do it really, really well. And the most important thing is the immediate content is going to be the first step that a lot of people take into engaging with your campaign more broadly, because this is what's going to get their attention and let them know that you're worth following. Next slide, please. All right. So another thing to consider is with content is how to get the most out of your content. So I've taken as an example here is a video, because this is what we see the most often is that people make really, really great videos. They spend a lot of money on it. They spend a lot of time on it. It's really interesting. They put it on their Facebook page or their YouTube, and then that's it. That's all they do with it. So there's a lot of problems with this. First of all, you've just spent a lot of time and money on making this video. Why settle for just posting it and walking away? There's so much more that you can get out of it, that you can do to keep the conversation around the video going, that you opportunities to get new viewers. But there's also the need to put it into formats that are going to get more people to watch it. And this is hopefully will help you kind of understand how to best balance those different types of content. So you have a video, which you need to get people to want to watch. So especially if the video is a lot longer, say you've made a short documentary, you've made a 15-minute like explanatory video, that's long for social media. It's not saying that people can't watch it if they won't watch it, but for social media, it's long if people don't know they already want to watch it. So one thing that you can do is create a trailer. So you can make, a 20-second clip that gives a really good overview of kind of what the video is about and why it's worth watching, and shows that it's interesting and that it's worth the time to devote and sit down and watch, 5, 10, 15 minutes. You can also make that immediate content out of it. So, take an image from the video, put some text over the top of it. Make sure that you're pulling out the key message from the video and then representing it in some images. You can do the same thing with like just an interesting image or an image from the video that's not a person. One thing though is if you're going to do this, make sure you have a photographer on set when you are filming. While it is possible to pull screenshots out of videos and turn those into posters, and I can admit that we've done that before due to a lack of planning, the quality isn't very good. It's much better to have a photographer on set taking some really cool photos. Plus you get some really cool behind the scenes photos that way as well that can really go into detail about the journey of creating the video, which is great, again, for building up your brand because it helps share your story and share more about your organization, your campaign, why you're doing what you're doing, kind of the people that are behind it. It really humanizes it and makes it more about people. When you do kind of behind the scenes stuff. Plus it can be fun. I mean, even when things are really, really serious, behind the scenes photos like imagery and photos, videos, things like that. It's a really good way to make things a little bit more fun and personable, even if the topic's really serious. Another option is you can post questions to try to get people into discussions, but an easier way to get people into discussions we found is actually doing polls. So Facebook, for example, gives you the option of creating polls. So, pull something out of the video that could be potentially divisive or, a really interesting like discussion topic and turn it into a poll. We found that often gets people talking a little bit faster. It's also, it's interesting research as well, but it's a good way to get people talking and a good way to get people to see at a glance if their sort of opinion is kind of in the majority or the minority, and then they're usually a lot more interested to know why. So these are just a few examples of how you can take one video, you can turn one video into 10 different pieces of content. Not to say that you should just be putting the same thing out over and over and over again, but that's what we mean, get really, really creative with it and find different ways. You can do like reactions, you can talk to people that were in it, you can do like, if it's a small documentary, you can do like 2-minute interviews with the person that was in it, covering things that weren't covered. There's the sky's the limit. There's a lot of different things you can do to really get, as we say, get more mileage out of what you've already created. And to kind of bring in new viewers and make it more interesting and engaging. Next slide, please. All right, and now just to finish on, just to look at some of the things that are that will help you increase your reach. So this is really into more of this sort of traditional promotion strategies that you can do on social media. Now, the most obvious one is advertising. So all the social media platforms offer options for advertising.
Some of them are more usable than others. I would say Twitter, for example, advertising doesn't work, not that it doesn't work as well, but it's not as much of a part of the platform. Let's put it that way. But with Facebook, Instagram, all the rest of it, it's pretty easy to set up advertising. Now that Instagram's owned by Facebook, you can actually run them all through the same ad manager. But yeah, so advertising is a good way to get some initial traction. So if you're launching something new, or if you're doing a big launch, or you want to build up some like initial audiences, advertising is really, really valuable. Because it gives you that immediate reach and that immediate access, but it's also really, really targeted. So if you go into the ad manager, there's a lot of options for how you can target your ads. So, very obviously the demographic information, location, age, gender, all the rest of it, but also some really, really interesting demographic information like profession, family status, economic status. You can also target it to people who follow specific pages. You can target the friends of your followers. You can exclude your followers, include your followers. There's a ton of different options for advertising on Facebook specifically. The only thing is it is a little bit fiddly, and they do often sort of change some of the rules around it. So if you want to advertise on Facebook well, you're really going to have to take time to get familiar with the platform, and you're going to have to stay familiar with it because they do change it more than I would like and more than I think a lot of people would like. But it does offer a lot of options. Also make sure that you familiarize yourself with the guidelines. So for example, Facebook, and I'll probably give most of my examples on Facebook just because that's where we do most of our advertising when we do, is if you're going to boost a post, for example, that has an image in it. So, or if you're advertising a poster, there are regulations on how much of the image can be taken up by text. So it's not a word count, it's what percentage of the image is text. Because they want things to be, they want images that are like, if it's an image, they want it to be an image. So there's a lot of restrictions around the amount of it that can be taken up by text. So that's something that's really frustrating if you don't know and you get your ad all set up and then you realize it's not going to run. So that's what I mean by learn the guidelines, not just around how to run the ads, but also what kind of content works, whether it's worth it to boost. So if you've run a Facebook page before, you'll notice that there's like a boost button. So you can boost things straight from the page, but that gives you kind of fewer options. You can set up ads that have a lot more. So if you set up the ads through the ad manager, it has a lot more functionality, which you may or may not need. You can boost your page. So there's a lot of different options. The only thing to bear in mind though is beyond financial sustainability, it does also potentially impact the credibility of the post because it will always say that it's boosted or that it's an ad. So content that is organic, people tend to respond to better. So if it says that it's an ad on the post, you just need to consider what that's going to do. Because if it's really clear that your campaign's coming from an organization, that doesn't matter. But if you're trying to really give a very sort of like grassroots feel that it's coming from within the community, or that it is coming from an individual, or that it's reflective of a community, sometimes having it presented as an ad can hurt your credibility. So there's a lot of pros and some potential cons to consider. One of the best things you can do is just be social. On Twitter especially, if you really want to be found on Twitter, it's, get into conversations. Find out what people are talking about, get involved. Find out where your audience is already located and go be there. Go post your content. Go find influencers. Go talk to people. Create a footprint for yourself manually. That's going to be the best. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time, especially compared to advertising where you just click a button and put in a credit card number. But being social and really making the effort to find those groups and be vocal in those groups, that is the number one way to really create a network that's going to enhance the impact of your work. Another trend, so always get on the bandwagon, which means you just need to pay attention to what's in the news and what's relevant. So newsjacking is just a, sort of a silly marketing term for when something is trending in the news, you share about it. So you'll notice that all of a sudden every consumer brand out there has a stance on COVID. suddenly every single, like Oreo is out there telling you to stay strong and stay safe and also eat their cookies. So it's this idea that if you know that there's a national or an international conversation going on, join that conversation. That's what hashtags are great for, is find out what the trending hashtags are and start using them. Find out what people are already talking about and join that conversation in a way that's relevant. Try to make sure you do it in a way that's relevant. It can really backfire when you weigh in on things that have nothing to do with what you do, or you kind of overstep. But make sure that you're paying attention and join in wherever you can. And then the last thing is just understanding the algorithms and how things appear. So things that have more of a following are shown more, they're seen more, they appear more on people's pages. When you do a big launch, get all your friends, get all your supporters, get everyone that you know is going to be willing to do this for you, and be like, hey, I'm posting this at 9 a.m. on Monday. Please go on, like it, share it, write a comment, do something. Especially with really big launches, beat those algorithms immediately. Make sure that you have it orchestrated, that right from the go, right out of the gate, you have 100 likes. Right out of the gate, you already have comments and shares. Then Facebook thinks, this piece of content is clearly amazing. I need to show it to everybody because it's popular. So, kind of like just little things like that. And if you want to start a discussion, for example, it's really hard to get someone to be the first person to comment. There's nothing wrong with having someone who is maybe not necessarily associated with the campaign, go in, make a comment, get the discussion started, because sometimes you just have to. You need to be able to kind of prod people along, because people often don't like to be the first. So that's what we mean by like beat the algorithm. So these are all just kind of techniques you can use to really enhance your promotion strategy online. And that sums it up, I think.